Hello and welcome to another tutorial. So what we're going to be doing this time is we are going to be extending the previous system setup for the RPG component where we had some basic stats and we had experience. So what we're going to be focusing on this time around is equipment. And in particular, again, we're going to be looking at the lower level side of it. So having equipment that's able to affect stats of the character is going to be the main focus. So we're not going to look this time at things like inventory management or being able to have the sort of paper doll system. It's often referred to as where you can equip particular sort of items on different slots. We will set up the concept of slots, but we're not going to focus on setting up the user interface for that. Inventory and user interface for a paper doll, those are kind of standalone topics that we will look at some point because those are a really cool thing to look at. We want to just focus really on the stats side, getting that infrastructure really solid and reliable for that. So let's dive on in. So what I'm going to do to begin with is, so we've already got our stuff for leveling curves, things like of that. What I want to do is with equipment, I think equipment, there is going to be a lot of stuff that's common with equipment. It might provide various stats, it might provide armor, things like of that. And then there might be specializations on top of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually create a script that will be equipment base. So every bit of equipment that we could have can inherit off of this. Now for a lot of equipment, I don't think we'll actually need to have stuff where we might have, a shield item or different things like of that. I think we can probably keep it a lot higher level. The reason being that unless we need different behaviors, there's not necessarily a need to specialize. And so in the interest of avoiding it getting too sort of potentially messy, I think we won't branch it out too much. So what I will do is I'm going to set up a couple of other scripts. So I will differentiate between equipment that is armor and equipment that is weaponry, essentially. So I will differentiate between those. And today the focus is just going to be on the armor side of things. So we'll create the other script for equipment and weapon. So, okay, that gives us our base ones there. So we can open those up and start to set up what we're going to need for these. So we have our equipment. Now something needs to be holding that equipment. So if we go to our character, we can see our character already has their stats. It already has their XP tracker. And if we take a look at the character stats, that is where we do have a bunch of key things there in terms of the stamina and ones like of that. So our equipment is definitely going to need to interact with this. So what I am going to do is we've got two different ways of how we could approach this. One approach, I could bundle that in with the character stats. The other approach is I could set up a separate component that's essentially an equipment manager. There's pros and cons to both approaches. And that's the thing, there's rarely one single right way to go about implementing something in code. There are occasional cases, like there are very occasional cases where there might be a single sort of dominant way of setting stuff up, but often there's multiple ways. And it's very easy to get hung up on which way you want to set things up. And that's something that can very easily just sort of stall progress. And it's hard to sort of at times find that balance between doing enough sort of planning and due diligence and diving into stuff. So in the case of this one, I am going to set up a specific equipment manager. And the reason for that is I think there is enough equipment-specific logic and functionality that I may want to add over time to actually make it worth partitioning that off. So I'm going to set that up. So we're going to have our equipment. I'm going to call this, I'm going to follow similar to what we had for the naming convention with the experience point stuff. I'll call it an equipment tracker. And this will sit on the character itself. So the equipment tracker is going to maintain a list of what equipment we currently have attached. Now, there are different ways we could go about approaching like of this. So if we think about it, we have different slots that things can be equipped in. And in terms of how we approach it, especially early on in development, it's good to consider what's going to be quickest and easiest for us to iterate on, what are the kinds of queries, things like of that we might be needing to do. And our equipment is not something that we necessarily would be iterating over all of the equipment a lot. Working with equipment that's in particular slots, yep, but iterating over all of it, possibly not so much. So what I would actually look at doing is I'm going to set up an enum here. So E equipment slot. And then if we think about different slots that we might have, so I'm going to put in an entry for unknown as the default. Then we'll have, let's just work our way up. So we'll have feet, legs, waist, chest, arms. Well, actually, arms would probably not be quite the right term. It's kind of more like a sort of like forearm slot. We might just call that the arms slot, and we'll have hands. We could also throw in, so we have neck and head. We could then also have things like being able to equip particular rings. So, we could have ring 1, ring 2. One thing that I would potentially do, because we might want to have these sort of in order, that we might want to have there be some pattern to these, is actually assign some specific values here. So what I'm going to do is this is 0, and then each one of these, I'm going to separate it by a decent chunk. That way, if I wanted to later on do something where I might have, left leg, right leg, things like of that, or break it down finer, I have intermediate numbers. So I'll often do this with enums just to actually split things out and separate them a little bit. In part because also if we're renaming things with enums later, actually can be a bit of a hassle. So that's good. We've got those set up. Then what I would have here is, it can be public dictionary. It'll be e-equipment slot. And then it will be an equipment base. And then equipment. We might call it current, because we might have different sets, archive things, stuff like of that. So that's going to be a new dictionary, like that. Also going to make it so that this is publicly gettable private set, like of that. So it's good. We have something that will be recording our equipment. So, okay, good so far. Well, our character stats, we're starting to get a bit of a dependency with things here. The character stats, and if we take a look at how we're sort of linking things, the XP tracker does talk to the character stats, but I think the character stats does have a dependency on our equipment tracker. So I'm going to actually put a require component type of equipment tracker. And then I will in here also retrieve that equipment tracker. So I'll make this protected because we might inherit from this at a later point and need to be interacting with it. So I'll just call it equipment like of that. And we can retrieve that in our start get component equipment tracker. So that's good. And we could technically do that in a wake. Would actually be a valid point to do that. So that's good. So what I want to then now do is our base stamina, for example, that should be affected by the particular equipment item that we might have. So our equipment should have stats associated with it. So we're going to have serialize field int stamina, and I'll default that to 0. Now there are going to be other stats we might set up as well, and we could also allow it just to provide a straight buff to health. Could be something that we allow it to actually do. We could also get more nuanced in how it works, in that we could have different modes to this, where it's a case of it can be something where it applies a fixed amount, or it could be a percentage-based amount. So we do have options there of sort of more sophisticated things we could do if we wanted to. So, okay, equipment will be able to have those. We can get rid of start and update. Going to change these into a scriptable object. Our equipment base we will mark as abstract because we're not instantiating it. That does then mean we need to come in and modify our armor and weapon ones. So these will inherit from equipment base. Can create our asset item menus. So we'll do the same thing for our weapons. And I just want to check where I set these up so I can put them in the consistent location. So menu name, so RPG, equipment, armor, file name, equipment, armor. Then we'll do the exact same thing for in the weapon, because our weapons might provide stats as well. That's a pretty common thing that we see, that a weapon might provide particular stats there for us also. So this is coming off of our equipment base. So that's good. I would also, in our equipment base, just mark both of these as protected rather than private, just because the child classes might need to access that. So, okay, good so far. Got a bunch of different things there. Well, our equipment, that needs a slot. So that's another thing we're going to set up here. Serialize field, equipment slot. So that's good. We will default that to unknown. So we've got our slot, we've got our stats. We're going to give it a name. We might refer to this as the display name. And we want to potentially allow for a description to have sort of flavor text for it. Would be a pretty cool thing to have. That means we can set up a function here, and we might allow it to be overridden. That could be get short name, and it just returns display name. And I'll mark these protected as well before I forget. We could have get description, which what that's going to do is, okay, that's going to return, well, we want a bit more than just the display name. So what I could have is display name plus we add in the new line. So that puts in the description then. So that's handy. We could also add in the stats. So what I could do is, because we can split this across multiple lines. So I could actually set it up so that it then has a bit of a string here. And that string could actually indicate what happens with the stats. So we might have a public virtual string get stat string. And so if stamina is greater than 0 and health is, well, actually let's check for if stamina is not equal to 0 and health is equal to 0. In other words, it makes a change to stamina but not health. Then I would return, we'll put the actual value. So we will say stamina, like that. And I'll actually put a plus. So that looks good. Now we might have negative stat though. So different ways we could go about handling that. What I could do is simple thing of if stamina is greater than 0, we do that. Otherwise, actually just do that because it will get the minus sign anyway. So, okay, that works for that scenario. Well, the other scenario we've got is stamina is 0 and health is not equal to 0, which becomes exactly the same except we swap the two things out. So that's two of the scenarios. We also could have the scenario of stamina is not equal to 0 and health is not equal to 0. So they actually are both different. And the fallback is we'll return string empty. So, okay, this looks decent. So with this case, I would actually combine the return. We have this. Now I'd split it across multiple lines just so it doesn't get too messy. Surround it by parentheses. They're not strictly needed, but they do make it a little bit clearer what's happening where. It would also actually line things up a bit. Again, not needed, but does make it a little bit clearer what's happening. Because then what I can do is var stat string. We get our stat string. And then if stat string, so we can't check if it's just empty. What we can do is if string is null or empty, stat string, then we do nothing. Otherwise, we chuck in this with the new line. So it's a little bit longer-winded in terms of what we're having to sort of write here. And we do need to make sort of judicious use of the parentheses there so that it behaves nicely. But now we've got something where it'll output the name, the stat string, the description. So that's good. So we've got a bunch of key sort of bits there. now we need to start having it that this feeds into our character stats and is updating things here. So I'm going to start to make a couple of changes here. One of the things I'm going to do is a void refresh UI, and I'm going to move these into that. Just because we're going to be refreshing the UI a bunch, so good to just move it into a common section. So at the very beginning, we'll also do a refresh UI. So I need to now start checking with equipment. Now I don't have anything equipped currently, so I'm going to set up a function here, which what I'll do, so I'll have a list of equipment base debug to equip public bool, and actually I'll not make those public, I'll make it a serialized field for both of these, and a debug equip. So these can just be helper little things we can use for debugging. So if that's set, first thing we do is set it to false. Then we go through for each item in the debug to equip. If the item is null, which it could be, we could have null entries, we skip it. Otherwise, I want to be able to say, okay, equip item, item. And we're going to make it that we have a public void equip item. And we provided an equipment base item to equip. And this is potentially going to send notifications. So I'm going to include a bool here for send notifications. Because this debug one, I want to turn that off. I don't want to send notifications in that case. So, okay, good. Well, the item to equip, the first thing I need to do is put it into a particular slot. So I need to be able to do, well, current item to equip, and I need to get its slot. So if we go to our equipment base, so I could change, this at the moment, I want this ideally to actually be a property. So where I can do something like this of get and a protected set, which means I have to make this public, but then being a property, it won't serialize, except I can make it do that by doing this field here. Now, if you're working in an older version of Unity, this can result in the name that gets shown being a little bit mangled because it's showing the internal name. Newer versions of Unity, so found the last sort of several versions, or last few sort of minor releases, the tech stream ones, have been fine. They actually output what you would expect. So that's just something, if you do use this and it's a fairly weird looking name, that's what's happening. So, okay, can provide the slot back. So that means I can access the slot. And then item to equip. So this is a case where I've got a choice between, I could have it have the actual scriptable object, or I could instantiate it. Now, where the choice comes in with this is, do I have transient data? So do I have data that I am needing to change individually for each copy of a particular item? If I do, then I need to instantiate it. So I think in this case, I would go with instantiating it. So scriptable object, instantiate, item to equip. Like of that. And then, well, the notifications we haven't set up. So I'm going to put in a using Unity engine dot events. And then here, I'm going to have a serialize field, unity event, and it potentially needs to provide the item. That could be useful to have. So on item equipped equals a new unity event like that. So then here I can check, okay, well, if send notifications is true, then on item equipped, invoke, and we provide item to equip. Now here, we want to check if we did actually equip something. So bool did equip item, and going to then be able to say did equip item is true. If we did equip an item, then I'm going to send out an event. And in this case, I'm going to pass in null because I don't have a valid entry that I could actually provide. And with this, I'm going to provide the one that was instantiated. So, okay, can send out notifications, which is good. That means the character stats can know when the equipped item changed. So on item equipped, equipment base. So this parameter can validly be null. That's just something we need to remember. If it's null, then that actually means that it's essentially doing a full refresh, potentially. So I can link this up to our character stats. So you can see under our character stats, we have on item equipped. So that's good. We've got that communication being able to happen there. Now we'll do a refresh UI. And then now we need to start looking at how this works. So we have our stamina and health that are being retrieved here. These need to take into account stats from the equipment. So we need to be able to get essentially, what would be a handy thing to be able to go is something like, okay, equipment dot stamina or additional stamina. Maybe stamina modifier. Names are always tricky. And then with this, that part is fine. And then I would add in equipment health modifier. So our equipment tracker can keep here a public int stamina modifier, publicly gettable, but a private set, and that's going to be 0. I'm going to move this down as well, so we've got similar things stored sort of in order. And same sort of thing with our health modifier, private set, like of that. So now when we equip an item, well, if we did have an item previously, so we can go previous item is equal to that. Our new item, we can do this. That simplifies our logic here as well. And then what we can do is we can work out the updated health modifier and stamina modifier. So stamina modifier would be equal to stamina modifier plus new item, and we need to be able to access its stamina. So similar to what we did here, we're going to change a bunch of these over so that we can retrieve them. And we'll change these so that they are properties that we've flagged for serializing. We'll change these to public like that. So that will work for being able to update the stamina. Now the previous item could be null. So if previous item is not equal to null, so if it is valid, well, stamina modifier, we can subtract previous item stamina. Now we're not checking for the previous item. We can't do that for the current item because, well, the new item, because we're explicitly using the slot, so we're expecting that it has to actually be there. Now, what we could do is we could have unequip item and we provide the equipment slot. So that would be a valid thing to do, in which case we can retrieve the previous item based upon that slot. We can update our stamina. So we've retrieved the previous item if it exists. If it does exist, we update the stamina. And we should also send an on-item equipped, except in this case, we'll go unequipped. And we, again, may provide the specific item is something that we could conceivably do. So I'm going to allow it to be passed through an item, but that also could validly be null. So what I would do is I'll put in previous item there. And actually, if previous item was null, I'm just going to return. We'll do nothing because we haven't. Nothing's actually changed. So if we didn't have a previous item, we just do nothing. So okay, that will be modifying the stamina here. The equipment tracker is refreshing those things. This is accessing the entries here. That should mean we're pretty much ready to go and set up a bunch of equipment. So I'm going to, under equipment, let's set up armor, basic armor, and we'll then duplicate a bunch of that. So this will be feet, legs, chest, waist, and head. So slot, can set that to chest. Simple chest armor. Doesn't protect much. We use the same description for each of them. Chest armor, we might say that that provides an extra 5 stamina. We'll use, for the feet, that might only provide 2. So simple footwear. Head, simple hat. That might also just provide 2, so it doesn't do a huge amount. Then we have the legs. Simple pants. That might provide 3, same description, but that might provide 3, maybe even 4, so a bit of a larger amount. And the waist, simple belt, provide a description, and that might provide 1 stamina. So to begin with, we don't have anything equipped. So what I'm going to do is run this, and then I want to equip some items. So let's start by equipping the chest item. So I'm going to tell it to equip. Now we can see it did clear things, but we can see that it then also has gone and hit an exception. And that's because it's checking to see if something's there when it might not be. So we need to do a current contains key item to equip slot, and otherwise we make that null. So we can try that again. And then what we'll find, again, we're going to equip chest piece first. Tell it to equip. You can see the stamina goes up. Let's add in a whole bunch of ones. So we'll add in the full set of armor. Tell it to equip that. You can see stamina, everything has gone up by quite a bit, so that's good. And let's set up a really good armor. And this might provide 20 stamina, but also 20 health. So we'll again run and we'll equip all of the basic items first. Or we'll equip the basic armor. So we go up by 5. Then we switch to the good armor. And we can see we get a much bigger jump there. And we've gone up in total 20, which lines up with the amount that we had here. So we've got the ability now to equip items for that to affect some of the stats, for it to affect it in a variety of ways. We've got those hooks happening for when we do go and equip something, which is great. So what we could then do at this point is setting up a couple of other little sort of helper ones here would be useful. So we could also have a serialize field, bool, debug, unequip all. And in that case, what we would do is if that's set, firstly we turn that off. Then we need to go through and unequip everything. So what I would do is our stamina modifier is equal to our health modifier is equal to 0. And then I would actually just go and say, well, current clear. And then on item unequipped with a null. We invoke that. So this just gives us a way, if we want to easily clear out all of the stuff that's equipped, then we can do that. So if I start the character off, give them the really good item, we equip it, then we take that away. Now we can see it's not refreshing, and that's because we did not hook up our on item unequipped. So our character stats tracker, we're going to have public void on item unequipped, equipment base, item unequipped. And again, we just need to do a refresh UI in this case. So we can connect this up, and that way then when we remove items, it will properly update. I'm also going to just pre-populate in here the basic set of ones. Just makes it a little bit quicker and easier for populating with things. So we can link this up. Character stats on item unequipped. So now I'll equip all of the items. Then I can remove them, equip them back again. We can do things like upping the level, and then we can get rid of those. If I go and equip them again, So they're already equipped, doesn't do anything if I try and re-equip them. And I can still go and unequip, so that works really cleanly and neatly. So it's good, we've got a system now where we have items that can affect stats, and they can affect stats at both the base sort of raw value level for it and also the secondary sort of derived stats, so it can handle that. We have it that we can have our different item slots. We can equip and unequip things. We can unequip a whole bunch of stuff. We can also equip a bunch of things. We're doing that so that in part here, if we wanted to have an equipment manager, we can easily go and do that. Now at the moment, we're only using a couple of stats, things like that. But something that we're going to be able to be adding to this is expanding out those range of stats. And that's one of the things that we will also be looking at is a wider range of stats, and then how could we procedurally generate items? So starting to look at some procedural generation of equipment and weaponry and stuff like that. So that's going to be a really cool area that we get to look at as well for this. But dive on in and experiment with this. See what you want to set up in terms of equipment. See how this might fit in for your own projects. If you wanted a thing to stretch it even further, you could have equipment affect XP gains. That's something where you could very easily have that. And that's a common thing you see in some games, that you might get equipment that will go and affect that. I haven't added in durability, but that also could be part of this as well, of adding in durability stats and things like that. So experiment, see the kinds of things that you can sort of add and modify there with it. Thanks folks, hope you found the video interesting and helpful. If you have, chuck in a like and subscribe. It really helps out, it's really appreciated. If you have any questions, chuck in a comment below. And if you're looking for the code for the project, the code is available up on GitHub. You can use the code in any of your own projects, commercial, non-commercial ones, you're able to be using it. If you're looking to try and find sort of other videos on a particular topic, I do have a searchable video archive, and there is a link to that in the description below. You can search based upon descriptions, and there's a lot more categories, things like that for it. And if you're looking for other ways to support the channel, then I do have a Patreon, and there's a link to that in the description below as well. But until next time, bye!